Okay, so you think you understand Apple. You picture the garage, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, a circuit board, a company that was destined from day one to build the most valuable products on the planet. You picture the black turtleneck, the keynote stage, the iPhone lifted out of a jean pocket like it was always going to happen. That's the story, and it is not entirely wrong. Apple did start in a garage. Jobs did come back and change everything. Fair enough. That's what it looks like from the outside. Here's what that story leaves out. In the spring of 1997, Apple had roughly 90 days of cash left before it ran out completely. Not 90 days of bad press, 90 days of money. The rescue came from Microsoft, Apple's fiercest rival, which agreed to invest $150 million in non-voting stock and commit to 5 more years of Office for Mac, a deal announced on August 6, 1997 at the Macworld Boston keynote to a room that reportedly booed the screen when Bill Gates' face appeared on it. The company that would one day be worth more than the GDP of most nations on Earth was weeks from bankruptcy, kept alive in part by the one company its fans loved to hate. Here's the number that explains why it got that bad. By 1996, Apple stock had fallen under $13 a share, down from a high near $70 just a few years earlier. Its share of the global PC market had slid from over 10% in the late 1980s to roughly 4%, and the product line, by most counts, had ballooned to somewhere around 40 different models, a dozen plus variations of the Macintosh alone, so close in specification that Apple's own retail staff struggled to explain the difference to a customer standing in front of them. This is the story of how a company nearly died from having too many good ideas, and how the fix wasn't a new invention, it was a subtraction. So where did this company actually come from? It's not one founding, it's 3. First, April 1976, the garage, where Wozniak's engineering and Jobs' salesmanship built the Apple I, followed a year later by the Apple II, the machine that helped turn personal computer into a category people actually bought for their homes. Second, January 1984, the Macintosh, a design triumph priced at $2,495 that also nearly sank the company because first-year sales fell well short of Apple's own targets. Third, the founding almost nobody counts, the Apple that ran from 1985 when a boardroom vote pushed Jobs out through 1996, cycling through 4 different CEOs in roughly a decade. 3 different Apples. Only one of them gets remembered. And what did it cost to survive the gap between them? Not factories, not research labs. It cost focus. And focus was the one expense Apple's leadership consistently refused to spend. Every new CEO brought a new strategy, and every new strategy meant more product lines, not fewer. The Newton handheld, launched in 1993 at nearly $1,000, sold poorly and became a punchline. The Pippin game console, launched in 1996, sold an estimated 42,000 units against a target of hundreds of thousands. And starting in 1995, Apple began licensing the Mac operating system to outside manufacturers, whose clones were often cheaper than Apple's own hardware. Power computing alone was reported to have captured meaningful share of new Mac sales within about a year. The company wasn't failing because nobody wanted its products. It was failing because it had stopped being able to say no to making more of them. Now, where does the money actually come from once this crisis breaks? Here's the anatomy nobody shows you. The core business was still computer hardware, and that revenue was collapsing. Apple posted a net loss of around $816 million for fiscal year 1997 alone. The overlooked layer was that clone licensing program. Cash in the short term, but bleeding hardware margin in the long term, since Apple earned far less per unit from a licensed Mac than from one it sold itself. And the high-margin afterthought, the piece nobody was tracking on a spreadsheet, was a small, unusually loyal customer base that never fully left, even through the losses. That loyalty, not any single product, is what the comeback was actually built on. So what was bleeding the company underneath all of this? 3 silent killers. Product line bloat that confused customers and split engineering resources across dozens of half-finished machines. The clone program undercutting Apple's own hardware sales. And 4 CEOs in 6 years. Scully, Spindler, Emilio. Each one reversing the last one's strategy before it had time to prove out. None of this was one dramatic failure. It was 100 reasonable sounding decisions compounding towards 90 days of cash. And here's the mechanism nobody sees. The fix wasn't a new product. It was Jobs back as interim CEO by September 1997, cutting roughly 70% of what the company made. Reported estimates put the product line going from about 40 models down to 4. 1 desktop and 1 laptop for consumers, 1 desktop and 1 laptop for professionals. The Newton was killed in 1998. The clone licenses were bought back and shut down the same year. The company that nearly died from too many ideas was saved by making almost nothing. Now, watch that mechanism play out twice. Apple, after the cuts, launched the iMac in May 1998 at $1,299, sold roughly 800,000 units in its first 5 months, then followed with the iPod in October 2001 and the iPhone in January 2007, each one a narrow single-purpose product sold into a locked ecosystem, not a sprawling lineup. By 2011, reporting at the time noted Apple's cash and investments at roughly $76 million actually surpassed the U.S. Treasury's operating cash balance. Now look at BlackBerry. In 2009, BlackBerry's maker held close to 20% of the global smartphone market. Rather than narrow its focus when the iPhone arrived, it widened it. Multiple keyboard variants, competing touchscreen and physical key lineups running in parallel. By 2016, its share of new smartphone sales had fallen under 1%, and it exited hardware manufacturing entirely by 2017. Same mechanism, opposite direction. One company subtracted its way back to life, the other added its way to irrelevance. So what happens from here? One future looks like this. A company treats focus as a permanent discipline, keeps saying no faster than it says yes, and compounds that decision for decades. The other future looks nearly identical for years. Solid sales, loyal customers, calm headlines, until 3 ordinary things go wrong at once. A sharper competitor arrives, leadership hesitates to cut a beloved but bloated product line, and the cash cushion that once bought time quietly runs thin. None of those 3 things is fatal alone. Together, they're roughly what left Apple with 90 days of runway in 1997. So the next time you watch a keynote and someone unveils one single simple product to a roaring crowd, that isn't confidence. It's the scar tissue of a company that once had 40 products and 90 days of cash. The real Apple story was never about genius. It was about learning at the edge of zero that survival meant choosing less. Some companies get to choose that lesson. Others get chosen by it. And somewhere right now, a boardroom is deciding without realizing it which one it's about to become.